Hello and welcome everybody to the Truth Lab podcast. This is episode number 4. I'm really grateful for today's special guest. His name is Cory, and I met Cory a few months ago, and he's an incredibly inspiring individual. And I thought this would be a great way to reinvigorate the Truth Lab podcast. Since the last one, I had a Jaron on from Jaronism, and he actually just interviewed me a couple hours ago. So I just got off of that and coordinated this with Cory. And here we are. So, Cory, first off, let everybody know a little bit about you and your background. And eventually we'll get into how you started your truth seeking journey.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. You're awesome. And really, I met you through doing my real life events, which I encourage anybody out there. First and foremost, I just throw this right at the audience because, you likely maybe come to this video because you care about the world. You see there's a lot of problems. You see things need to change. Well, I have a video with over 30 different strategies so you can find people local to your area. And I use those strategies to find people like yourself, Alex, and many others so we can do local events. And of course, we have visions and ideas to make it even bigger. And you're helping with me with those visions and ideas. So I want to say thank you, Alex, for just participating, for being willing to help. And you've just been awesome for that. And so I just want to say thank you. And for all my audience sake, I want everybody to know your work and follow your work. And thank you for what you're doing with the Truth Lab. I think it's great. You're bringing on a lot of interesting guests, very impactful too. So yeah, I'm an author. I produce videos, I produce documentaries, I do a lot of big projects. Right now, I have a medical project with a bunch of whistleblowers. If you're out there in the medical field, you might have interest in it. You will have interest in it when it comes out. I'll tell you that. And then, of course, I'm getting involved with permaculture, which is how we grow food with using nature's systems. We have a food forest in our backyard and my family. And we have a bunch of different plants of all different kinds. And we even got flooded, but this food forest still survived because we're here in Florida. And so anybody from Florida is willing to network with us. But I'm in West Central Florida, and that's where we plan to do a lot of big stuff. But I do all my work worldwide, so not just locally. I like to encourage that people do both. And so I plan to get involved with universities and colleges, already taking steps here and there, building the network up and up, building momentum. And we're meeting new people every time we do an event, which to me is like a big plus, right? And then more connections happen from there spontaneously on its own. And that's what you see when you start following your passion and the truth. Things just start opening up on their own. You start meeting more people, and then sooner or later, you're like, "Wow, I'm co-authoring a book with Jim Gale." Or now Jim Gale's on TV. It's like, what's going on here? And so that's what's happening. It's very inspiring in light of the dark world that we live in. All the problems that we have to face. We need to look at the light side of things here. There is potential. There is a great potential for humanity to free itself if we recognize that in these times of deep darkness, these are the times where we have to bolster the faith and the courage of the populace, the ones that are looking for solutions, who are like, we got to do something. It's going to wake up a lot of people. People are going to start questioning things. And so that is an opportunity to say, well, look at these solutions that you never knew existed, that the schooling system kept away from you, that they never taught you, right? And so I'm coming across all that, and I don't claim to be an expert. I don't claim to know it all, but I am finding a lot of material that a lot of people are not looking at. So I have a more obligation to share it. That's why I've done my books on slavery and abolitionism, Taoism, right, and permaculture and these medical projects. They're all unique. They've never been done before. And it's just frankly because nobody has really looked at certain angles or ways of doing things. And there's still a lot of bridges to make between freedom communities so we actually free ourselves. Like I'm thinking, how do we change the world, not just change the community, although these two are connected. So there is a strategy to that. Jim Gale is developing a strategy too. My strategy does involve getting, land locally and creating more of a community education center. So I thank you, Alex, for joining me on that journey. And I encourage, you to share your thoughts with me in regards to how you think, we can change the world and the audience as well. Let's get this conversation going. Most people know the problems of the world and they know generally what to do. The question is like, how do we do it with other people? How do we try to set that up and make it so that way it spreads worldwide into a domino effect, right? We gotta think very strategically like that. So thank you, Alex, for inviting me on the Truth Lab, and I hope I just threw out some ideas there to get people inspired.
You did. I mean, you almost make it seem like as soon as you started talking, this is what you were doing. But I am a little curious, like when was that moment for you? Like when did this whole truth seeking journey start for you? Like was there a pivotal moment?
Not really a pivotal moment, but throughout my life, it's just been a progression. Since I was 13, I was researching ingredients in the store, just going around looking at products and reading them and saying, "Whoa, why does this cause cancer? Why does this cause diabetes? Why are there all these sugars and seed oils and all sorts of things that people are starting to pick up on now?" But I was like a kid and nobody knew about it. Nobody talked about it. And I was like reading this in the store. I'm like, you know, I felt kind of special in a way as a kid. It's like, oh, I got this knowledge other people don't. And I'm reading all this stuff. It's like, oh, okay, interesting. So, and then I just built up on that. I started introducing to my parents different products. I was like, buy this instead, right? And then I started to work out, started to get healthier, started to cook. And now my mind started to see things, right? I started to understand, wait, it's not just our health, it's our freedom. I started entering the political sphere and became very political in 2016, was like a pro-Trump, pro-conservative. I knew everything about the guy. That was my direction. And I could defend him against every argument at the time. And I did not question the morality of it. I didn't get down to my psychology of it. Of course, I was new to politics too, so I didn't see the cycles of history. I wasn't looking at that. The school system teaches you obedience. They teach you you're an American. This is your country. You got to be proud of it, and stand up for the flag. And I know, of course, later on in the school system, they start to challenge some of that, but then they turn you into a radical, on the left. So whatever, it doesn't matter. Left or right, I found out both those were divisions. Just like in the medical field, you have these different divisions that take place even within just the alternative media, and nobody's getting help. Like at the end of the day, nobody's getting help. So you have all these people fighting with each other, and the world isn't changing. You have left versus right. You have new politicians entering new politicians, new doctors, oh, new drugs. The world is still getting sicker. The world is still getting, more tyrannical. Something's not right. So we have to get down to the root cause of it. And so I became a health coach and got into nutrition and started realizing, wait, we have to treat the world like we do an individual. Let's look at the whole condition. Let's not just look at one country. The whole world is suffering under tyranny. It's not just America. This is evident because people can't buy raw milk. They can't grow certain plants. They need permission to go from place to place. I mean, this is crazy. Slaves on a plantation needed permission slips to go from plantation to plantation, right? They needed permission from their master what to do. So, when you start studying that history and the psychology, and you realize there's a reason why they don't teach about figures like Lysander Spooner in school, there's a reason why we're not free. And it's simply because we've been trained into obedience as virtue. And we believe that other people have the right to rule over us. So I got into voluntarism and recognized this belief system that we believe in authorities. We believe in these people who rule over us. That's called statism. I realized this was where it's at. This is where I got to focus a lot of my time and energy because I found out this is the root cause as to why people are enslaved. They believe legitimately that other people should rule over their own life. So this is also well demonstrated in case you guys don't believe me. Watch the movie The Jones Plantation. It's a very good movie done by Larkin Rose, and it really shares with us how we kind of go from point A to point B, like this tyranny and how it evolves so they can create more subtle forms of slavery, forms that you won't recognize as slavery and more so accept. And how do people come to accept it? And how does it feel like, oh, I'm in charge, we the people for the people, but in reality, it's not, right? That should come as a shock to people who believe in these American foundational principles, which, I have all the books from the founding fathers of America, and I do think a lot of their words are true, and a lot of us aren't following it. But the question again is why, right? Why did they create the Declaration of Independence? Why did they free themselves from Britain? And has that been done before in history? Yeah, many, many, many times before America. It's not a special occasion. It is a powerful, courageous, action, but it's something that has been done before. And the abolitionists really saw this because they weren't far after the American revolutionaries. They were not even 100 years. So they saw how the government quickly turned tyrannical. They're like, wait, America says that we're for all people and that everybody has the same rights, by God, by the Creator, but yet they have slaves. Yet this Constitution allows them to tax people. Like they saw all these hypocrisies, all these contradictions, and they were just naming them. People like Josiah Warren. And they were setting up their own towns for the Underground Railroad, and they were freeing themselves, and they were educating slaves, and they're saying, hey, you can be more than just this, drudgery and living this life. No, you can be more than that, empowering them, right? Education and not using politics. That's a very radical position, but that's what the abolitionists used. And if it wasn't for the abolitionists, that whole cause wouldn't have sparked into the light. Everybody thinks of Abraham Lincoln. He's an abolitionist. No, the dude was pro-slavery for a long time. Look at the letters that William Lloyd Garrison sent to Abraham Lincoln. I mean, he's not an anti-slavery president. The politicians are kind of like the backbone of the philosophers. The philosophers create the ideas, they educate the people, and the politicians say, "Oh, that's a good idea. Let's use that to control people." Or let's use that so we can like kind of manipulate people's minds into thinking that we serve them, but in reality, we're going to use that so that way when they serve us, we can, rob from them and take their stuff. This is how history has just been repeating for the past 6,000 years. It's always been like this if you look at history objectively, at least from my view.
Well, I thanks for all of that and all your passion. And then, like I mentioned, I was curious about like a pivotal moment, and I like how you talked about reading
Hmm.
ingredient labels because think
Yep.
about there's people right now, literally in this moment, waking up to that, and sometimes it's unfortunate that it takes like diagnosis. It's my friend actually, John, who's running for mayor, who I'm trying to help out, but anyways, like how sometimes it takes like someone getting diagnosed with something to start realizing they have to start being more mindful of what they're choosing to eat. And
Mm.
think about it's one thing when you're at the store and there's labels, but then when you're at a restaurant, it's not like you're getting with your receipt, here's your label, here's all the seed oils or carcinogenic compounds that was in there. And so you said that was around 2013
Yeah,
about.
so I was born in 2000, so 13 is when I started researching, 16 politics, 18 health coach. But yeah, it's been a continual progression, of course, I'm still on my journey. But yeah, I got out of politics because I didn't ever question the morality of it. And there was a video done by Brian Young, and High Impact Flicks is his name. He goes by so many different channels because he's been censored a ton, but he had a video with like 5 questions, and I sat down with my conscience, and these 5 questions just did not settle with me. I was like, I couldn't wrap my head around it. It's because I never asked myself the morality of politics and the moral contradictions with my own conscience in relation to politics. And so, very few people talk about that. Of course, nobody on the news, no politician is going to ask you those questions. But when you sit down with yourself and do that, you start to open up a whole new way of thinking, right? And that's why voluntarism exists as sort of a political position, but really it's just a way of life that everybody mostly lives. Everybody wants to live voluntarily with each other. They only create the exception with politics. So actually, anarchy, freedom, voluntarism, this is our reality. Of course, that just means no rulers, anarchy. People are afraid of that word. I don't use it. I use voluntarism instead. Really, it just means that you own yourself, that principle of self-ownership, and that you don't have the right to initiate violence against another. That's called the non-aggression principle, right? And so there's people who try to say this is what this ism, this ology, whatever. But basically, it's an understanding of how we've been interacting for many, many years as a human species, how we get things done cooperatively, without using violence. And we do it all the time. It's just not in politics. We create this exception in politics, and that leads to, by the way, the number one cause of death, known as democide. So it's a big deal to me that I share it with everybody because, oh, I'm in the medical profession. I want to save lives. Well, what better way could you save lives than by looking at the top cause of unnatural death? It's like, to me, it's like that's so apparent. And of course, you can look up that term democide, and you can look up the menticide.
Looking that up, please. Background. I haven't really heard that before. I think that's fascinating because, for one, Cory, I mean, we know you had a nutritionist as the guest speaker at your last event,
hmm
and she may have mentioned, I think it was discussed how 50, 60 years ago, less than 10% of Americans had chronic disease, and now it's the majority of Americans.
Yep.
So it's like the clock's ticking for us to reverse because, as we know, nature is the solution. Nature is what heals. And that's literally all I was just talking about, with Jaron about the power of moringa to help with detoxing. But then there's other plants as well. And I was sharing with Jaron about ethnobotany. I'm not sure if
hmm
you've but ethnobotany is a huge passion of mine. It's a branch of science
Wow.
that I really admire because it's the science of the relationship between plants and people and how that forms culture. And so I shared earlier how when I was living in Kauai and I became a docent for the National Tropical Botanical Gardens, I had to study like the history of the Hawaiian Islands, before people came there. But then once
Mm-hmm.
I did, I learned that the ancient Hawaiians believed their ancestors were plants, but specifically the kalo or taro plant. And it's fascinating because that plant is so resilient. And so it's the idea that, like, yes, a lot of plants are very resilient, but for some reason, there's some plants that are just bulletproof, resilient, and they have great nutrition. And it's the idea that, like, we are what we eat, we are what we absorb. So we want to become bulletproof. We want to become resilient. We want, just like as you and I know, I mean, yeah, I promote what I believe are the world's best moringa capsules, but I give away seeds, I give away trees. I'm all about it because, like I tell people, it's not enough to just consume the plants. You got to grow them, and you have to have a relationship where, like, it's also making oxygen, and you provide
hmm
dioxide, and you have this, spiritual experience, and to me, that's how we have a great quality of life. And that's how we,
Yep.
so I mean, without going too much on a tangent, in Hawaii, I'm not sure if you've heard of this, there's a system of resource management called the Ahupua'a. And it basically is a way to divide an island into different regions based upon the top of a mountain all the way down through waterfalls, rivers, streams, through the land into the beach and ocean into the coral reef. So the idea was like people would be in such tune with all the resources in their ahupua'a, and they would understand certain animals, the spawning and the plants and everything. And that's why allegedly when Captain Cook and Europeans made contact with the Hawaiians, they said they were some of the strongest, healthiest people they had ever seen. And, I couldn't help when I was learning this to look around and to see sometimes the stereotype of some of the Hawaiians now that are kind of like displaced people that, came into colonialism or the, military occupying the island and them being fed stuff like spam and stuff that would, have their ancestors rolling in the grave of,
Man.
yeah, so I couldn't help with that knowledge when I moved back to Florida to be curious about the indigenous people here and what they were like before Europeans, came over. But it's really
hmm
interesting because it's like you said, there's, 6,000 years or whatever, there's history and there's cycles and, to realize that nature continues to be the solution, And
hmm Yeah, and that although there are cycles, there is a progression that's taking place. For better or for worse, depends on how you look at that. But technology is a new thing. It's not something that, uh, as far as I'm aware of, and some people are probably going to disagree. They're going to say maybe we did have more advanced technology at one point. I don't know, but it just seems like a rather new phenomenon, at least to our psyche and our grandparents and what we talk about with our families. But if you go back further, maybe, perhaps I'm not going to deny that possibility. Of course, it's like, how did we build the pyramids and so forth? But basically, it's interesting to see how technology is affecting our psyche, and then it's causing people to really recognize the importance of nature, right? But that's just one thing. The second thing, like you said, is diet, right? But I would argue the third thing is politics. I mean, people are losing touch with not just their environment, but themselves, because themselves and the environment are supposed to be one. As you say, we are supposed to be connected in a sense to nature. I agree. That's like the whole reason why my channel is called Nature is the Answer. Right? It's like that's my central focus, which is why I had to look deeper into politics as a freedom fighter for the Constitution, populist. Now everybody's in that position now who's right leaning and they're super pro Trump and they worship him like an idol, like a god. I was in that position in 2016. I got out of that because I'm a truth seeker at heart. I don't worship deities. I don't worship people. I don't see one person as the way you change the whole world. Now, yes, as one person, you can make an influence on other people, but by influencing other people, that's how you change the world. It's the mass amount of people that create this world. And if you want to create any real, sustainable, long-lasting change, that's where you have to focus. There was an abolitionist, his name was Aidan Ballou, and he wrote a document called Moral Power versus Political Power, and showing how moral power is superior in almost every single way. So you can pull that one up too if you want. But that one is so powerful for freedom because, here's an abolitionist at the time figuring out how do we change things, and this is the strategy they employed. And so it's again the politicians who take this and they say, well, what if we can use that to our benefit? And that's how they co-opt movements. That's how they create, counter intelligence and counter opposition to current movements so they can overthrow them or use them to their benefit or whatever. Right? That's how they maintain their power. If a family wants to stay in power, and it's a certain bloodline, like you see in kings and queens throughout history, they want to do everything in their power to try to keep that power differential between them and the mass public that they claim to represent. They want to keep certain knowledge for themselves and keep other knowledge for them, keep them in ignorance of the knowledge that they have, keep certain technologies for them, keep that technology away from the masses, stuff like that, right? And so when you bring that to the people, what do you have? You have an empowerment. So you say, hey, this is how you can grow your own food. Now the person's not dependent on the corporation or the agribusiness to grow the food for them. People now are in charge of their own food supply. So the same thing goes for health, goes for politics. It's all interconnected here because these all affect people's health. These all affect people's well-being and their psyche. They all can be conceived in trauma, which, a lot of our problems are. So when you break it down to that fundamental level, which again it's hard for people, they don't want to talk about psychology or philosophy, but it is generally what creates our world. From the mind comes our actions to the world. So heart, mind, guts, you need to know in order and care in order to act, right? And so that it's a process. And if you recognize every step of that process, what you have is a world that's disfractionated, right? We're always focused on technology in the material world, on the left brain, scientific, how do we find out all the statistics? But we're not caring about people's emotional feelings, how they feel, how they interact with nature and their environment. Do they have a purpose or meaning or value in life, right? There's these different sides we need to look at. And that's why medicine is failing and politics is failing. It's because there's a lack of that creative expression, that intuitive expression, that harmony with nature. And so people are going to learn perhaps the hard way through experience, but I would like for people to learn through awareness, and many people are. It's just not going to be the mass majority, and that's fine because most revolutions in history happen with like 3% of the population, right? It's really the strategy because if you talk to a lot of people who care about freedom, they're talking about flat Earth one day, aliens the next, and then how they're being enslaved medically the next day. It's like, what are we talking about here? And are we really focused on how we change this world? So that's why, creating an education community center for me is important. And we can talk about all sorts of different topics, but we can try to really hone in on what is that solution and just get that conversation going. How can we organize locally and create an actual change without using violence, without using the state, without using politics? We can invite them, say, hey, join us, be a part of this, but we don't want to engage in your system. Like Jim Gale says, right? He didn't ask for permission to build his buildings on his property, and he didn't get permits to build all the stuff that he did. And when the state came to him, they ended up with tears in their eyes, willing to support him because Jim didn't come out them saying, "Oh my gosh, you're the state, you're violent." He came at them with love, and he said, "I'm not here to do any of what I'm doing because I'm trying to compel somebody against their will. I'm trying to do it out of fear. I'm not willing to be in fear. I'm doing this because I care about the world." And when the state realizes that, the people, the state is just people, when we realize it's just people, everything is just people, then we don't treat them as like they have more rights than us or they have less rights than us. We're all just on the same kind of equal playing field in life. So that's the realization. It's so basic, so fundamental. It's like, yeah, we're all just people, but yet we don't apply that. So that's the realization that we need to get people to. It's a moral enlightenment. It's just as we would recognize the slave is not meant to be a slave. It's like how as basic as that is, that took 6,000 years, 4,000 years or whatever, to figure out, right? How come it took so long just to figure out something so basic as self-ownership? To understand that you own yourself. Well, it's because people had all these stigmas and they were fearful and they said, well, if it wasn't for slavery, what about the economy? Without the slaves, who would pick the cotton? The same exact excuses happen now. Oh, people are they're never going to do it. It's like you push yourself down. You push your own value down. We can change the world if we simply change the way we think about others and ourselves. We don't have enough confidence in ourselves, right? And we push ourselves down to insecurities. And you wonder why the people are in power are the way they are. It's because they have insecurities. As above, so below. Let's not operate on their playing field. They're in fear of losing their control. We're in fear of them using their control against us. It doesn't help, right? We want to focus on them and point the finger, say they're the problem, but what about ourselves? We give them the power. So we have to localize and decentralize and encourage these different solutions, and not just talk about that, but put it into action.
Yeah, spot on. I mean, a few things come to mind. For one, if you could summarize, that was called Moral Power, the book, or
Yeah, moral power versus political power. I think it's specifically called the superiority of moral power versus political power. And the strategy the abolitionists used, they called it moral suasion. So it's related.
okay. But I was just curious because I'm gonna definitely look into that. But if you
Hmm.
maybe summarize like the conclusion of that book or something, I'm just curious with it because I feel like it's a big part of all of this, because
Hmm.
what I mentioned earlier about the ahupua'a, it applies here to what we call watersheds. So it's the idea that like in Hawaiian culture, the Hawaiian word for uh, water was wai, W-E-I, and the Hawaiian word for wealth is YY. So it's kind of common sense when you think about your community being healthy and strong and vibrant, you have to have an abundant supply of fresh water.
Hmm.
So it's like here in Florida, we find ourselves in one of the most unique places in the world because we have more freshwater springs than anywhere else. You
Yes.
know, it's mind blowing to me, but it's the idea that instead of it being, we live in Pinellas County or Pasco or Hillsborough, it's about how do we, have it based on watersheds. Like I was saying, in Hawaii, it's easier because you have all this topography and here's the mountain and this is the way the, waterfall and the stream and the coral reef and like that. It's not like a man-made boundary. It's just looking at like nature in the
Hmm.
watershed, and then here it has to do with our aquifer. So that's one thing I've been into for a while. Um, so the moral power, though, I'm just trying to understand like the
Yeah.
just to simplify.
Yeah, I would say, and it's a good question because the abolitionists were very religious. And if you look at a lot of ancient cultures, what really brought people together? What mobilized them strongly against a cause? They had certain rituals, certain exercises, certain dances. They were in touch with not just the environment, but each other because of that. They had a physical and emotional and spiritual connection. Which is something, by the way, that, with our events, we have to build up to, right? It's like there's certain people that may come and go, some people who care about the message and the message, but um and the mission, right? But it's really like over time we need to incorporate dance and music, expression in different ways to help bridge bonds between people. Like people bring food to our events, right? And so that's like one way, right? People share all sorts of things. They Q&As, I invite anybody to be a speaker. That's one thing, right? But having a physical, emotional connection is another. And I think a lot of the tribes and ancient cultures had that, which made them much more suitable to say, hey, if somebody were to come and take over our land, we're already prepared. to take over, to prevent that from happening. And so that type of connection, I think, is missing. And so part of moral power, what Aidan Ballou talks about, is this idea of God, of spirituality, right? And that united the abolitionists more than anything. Carl Jung said that the strongest bulwark against the state is religion. Now, I know that some people may get triggered off of that because they think, well, religion is a control mechanism. Well, Carl Jung said that too. See, that's again why the state takes over churches and they take over religions and use that to their own control. And they operate as one as well. Like I said, they have their sacred texts, they have their deities, and people worship the state like a god. So Carl Jung says all of this in his book, The Undiscovered Self. And he talks about how people treat the state like slaves. He called it state slavery. This is all public, and I'm surprised no psychologists are talking about it, but again, because I have to be the one to dig this all up. And so part of the reason why I'm doing the medical project, it's very comprehensive. And it's unfortunate people have not seen these connections because people say it's human nature to rule and dominate over others. It's human nature to have all these systems that can, no, it's not. Where's the evidence psychology wise? I want you to show me, right? Because, history. It's like, well, history shows that we had slavery and we ended it. You see what I mean? Any argument people throw at me about how, we need government and all these different laws and systems to control people, I can just say, well, isn't that the same excuse people made for keeping slavery? And that's exactly what the abolitionists had to face, a whole world of people who were completely resistant. So how would they bolster their courage against such a cause? It required faith. It required God, something way beyond man. So they said, you're not meant to be a slave to man. You serve something higher. You serve God. You serve truth. You serve natural law, whatever it was. You serve something that is not limited to just man. It could be morality itself. It could be ownership itself, right? So they used all these different appeals, and that was part of the moral suasion. And so that's kind of a summary. He ends that whole text with like a quote from like I think just a poem basically about God. And so he does that because he's passionate. He cares, right? And if he didn't have that passion and care and emotional, spiritual investment in the cause, would he be as effective? That's the question, right? And where do people go when they have traumas and they have fears? Where can they go? If not towards some sort of religion or faith that can help them get out of it. Most of the time, people still do that nowadays, even though there's, of course, atheism and now there's scientific modalities, but we find out they're not working as well as the somatic experiencing and connecting with people through exercise and in song and dance. How come these spiritual traditions are healing for people? And this is why Carl Jung got attacked. And now Jordan Peterson's getting attacked because he's talking about the Bible and religion as a psychiatrist. Well, it's because they see how the psyche works and they've dealt with clients and they see that religion is a modality unlike anything else. But that's why, again, it's used to control people as well. So, it's either a very freeing tool or it's a very enslaving tool. And it depends on how you use it. The first government, Sumeria, was based on the idea that these people had the divine right by God to rule over others that were inferior to them. So government is conceived in religion. But at the same time, anarchy is conceived in religion. The first anarchists in history, Taoist and Christian, were saying, hey, God is our ruler and man is not to be the rule over us. So religion is really that pinnacle tool, I would say, to the shifting of the cultures. And atheism is kind of an interesting rebellion against religion. And it could be used, again, also for state power or against. Some people will say, well, we need a scientific revolution. We need to, turn us into cyborgs and merge us with machines and, have the state use all sorts of technologies and have them have all the statistics and have a technocracy where robots and AI runs the world and tells us what to do. I mean, and Carl Jung said, if you view everybody as statistics, which they did in World War II, and you are an atheist government, which most of the governments were in World War II, you know, that's you have a world based on science, but not based on heart or compassion or care for another human being. And that's psychopathy, that's sociopathy. So it's interesting seeing the connection between science and religion and how they could both be good or bad. And that right there tells you the strategy that we need to do.
Well, I could say scientism is indeed a religion, and sometimes they can be a little more fanatical than religious people. But so I appreciate the summary, the conclusion. I mean, I'm assuming this book was written directly from the person who did this, so this was written a while ago, and I
Yeah.
assume Christian, right?
Yep. 1800s, 1830s, 1840s.
And I love moral suasion. I love that. I love that phrase. That's
Yep.
awesome. Well, Cory, I mean, I'm sure you remember this. I mean, when we first met, I mean, I think the second word out of my mouth, other than hello or thank you, was volunteerist. I mean, were you surprised volunteerist when I met you? And
Yeah, I was surprised you used that term because, of course, that's like a focal point of my work. So I'm like, wow, it's awesome that I'm meeting somebody who knows what that is. And see, these ideas are expanding so exponentially because of how popular they are. So all it takes is a couple bigger influencers than us, and Elon Musk or whatever, RFK, it doesn't matter who it is, sharing these ideas with the public, and the public starting to realize, huh, we don't need to play this two-party system or three-party system. We can understand ourselves and self-ownership and understanding our traumas and our psychology and the philosophy. And now we can understand this idea of like slavery and abolitionist and what real anarchism is. Like none of that has ever been really thought of, even as a spark of an idea in most people's minds. Again, the historical figures I study are not taught about in our schools, but I would consider them the true American heroes. Like Lysander Spooner and Josiah Warren, Adin Ballou. I mentioned them. There's many others. William Lloyd Garrison being a prominent abolitionist. But Henry Clark Wright and Ezra Heywood, Angela Heywood, and there's just the list goes on. I have like hundreds of them in my book. So, but these are all American heroes truly fighting for freedom on all fronts of all aspects of life, not just let's free ourselves from Britain. Let's free ourselves mentally, physically, spiritually on every single level. Let's reform the prison system. Let's reform the agricultural system. They were doing all of that back then in the 1800s. All of that.
what Wilberforce, right, with Amazing Grace.
Hmm. Yeah. He's in
But
my book too, I think.
funny. So when I decided to help my friend John become the next mayor of Dunedin, it was after a Rotary Club installation meeting at a
Yeah.
mutual house. And I shared this with John. John hadn't heard of volunteerism, and I shared because he was asking about my views. Nothing's better than when people are sincerely interested and are seeking to understand. And I shared it with him, and he got it, and he also mentioned about our founders and the idea of a constitutional republic. So the way I try to explain it is I see a way of trying to seamlessly transition from like where we are now to where we want to be, and even if it's just 3% of us, so that's why all we can do is to try to have conversations and build rapport with decision makers, because sometimes I don't see it as politics, I see it as decision makers sometimes, and to sometimes realize like who's making the policy, like to simplify it to like policy making, and then like what even is a policy, and then to understand psychology of habits, because think about it, man. I don't have to explain it to you. I'm sure you understand. If you've ever tried to change someone else, you realize how difficult it can be to
Yep.
even change yourself, and to realize that. So then that's where like skills of effective communication come in, and rapport building, and the whole idea of listening, and how trust really builds, and how that can happen. So I mean, you may recall I asked that nutritionist, I can't recall her name right now, maybe from Naples. So, and I was like, if you were Secretary of Health for the state of Florida, what would your policy be? And she brought up gardens and schools and things like that. So I mean, do you ever think about that? Like imagine if somehow you could be, just hypothetical to get the brainstorm going. Like if you were governor of Florida, like what policies would you do? Or if you were president, like what policies, because sometimes the way I see it, like if I became president, I would be the last president, because I would help to prioritize the transition to volunteerism, for those that want to. Because even think about it, what's so ironic is we can't force people against their will to choose for them to be responsible and
Hmm.
autonomy. You know what I
Yep.
mean? So it's
But that's the whole idea.
even if everybody had access to what it means, that there is this better way and
Right.
culture and health, there's people that no matter what, they just
Yes.
incapable. And then it's like, well, what do we can't force them to change because then we're violating our own
Yeah,
non
but it would be counterintuitive. You can't force someone to do that.
exactly. Yeah.
It's impossible. See, you have to approach it like a practitioner, but yeah, it's an interesting idea, right? I want to say that that position is mostly upheld by libertarians today, and voluntarists who may not understand the word statism, or the concept, right, and how that works on the psyche. Because I would never accept a position like governor, even if I had the ability to change things overnight. I know that sounds controversial, but if you simply look at the nature of that mindset and how it operates, it makes the state infinitely more dangerous to be in that position and do good with it. Because now what you're doing is you're legitimizing that authority and saying that authority can be used for good when in reality it is inherently evil. And that's actually the worst thing is to have a libertarian candidate or somebody who's for limited government or minarchism in office. And I know that sounds really, really strange, but it's because that when people accept their slavery and they do not see it as slavery, do not see the evil, and they simply accept it for what it is, then it allows it to grow. It allows it to go off with a free pass. And so then what happens is, as you've seen throughout history, and America is a good example, it turns into a tyranny even worse than before. Because what we did was we create these terms like republics and democracies out of these kings and queens systems that were outright evil, or communism. We say, oh, these are outright evil. So we create these other systems as an alternative. But if it's still based on the same premises, the same fundamental roots, you can change the wording, but the wording is just going to make it more deceptive. And when you mix a truth with a lie, it makes the lie more dangerous, right? So it's really a play on words, and this is what they've done with symbolism, with colors, all sorts of things, you name it. And Mark Passio would call it like the dark psychologist at the top, who frankly run the world actually in the shadows. There's people who know how to manipulate minds. I mean, look at Goebbels in Nazi Germany and the symbolism that they used to help people around that cause. And that cause revigorated the economy, changed so much, made everything so nice for Germany. Everything that people wanted, loved Hitler. They worshipped him like a god because he gave them everything that they wanted. That was precisely the problem. He gave them everything they wanted and made Germany better. That was the problem. And unless you see why that's the problem, you're just going to be repeating history again and again through the Tytler cycle, the Toynbee cycles. I've studied these guys, and they talk about the cycles of history. You're just going to see a continual progress of, oh, there's hope, there's change, this person's promising for us. And then now it turns into tyranny again, and nobody knows why. Oh, I don't know how it happened. At best, people are just corrupt, and they just end up in the position that the previous person was in. It's because it's in the nature of power that corruption is inevitable. And no matter what, you're going to have democide so long as you have that seat of power. But that relies on the masses of people believing in it. So the best thing you could do if you're going to run any political campaign is to be non-political and not accept any position and to tell people and educate them about who they are and their rights and self-ownership. And I know not everybody's going to understand, not everybody's going to apply that. That's okay. See, Gandhi, when he created change in India, used something called nonviolent resistance. And also in America, it was called civil disobedience by the abolitionists. And this has been studied by many academics as the most powerful strategy to change the world. So notice it's also, tying in with the religion and the science, this can be even more powerful in symbolism and so forth. But Gandhi was able to overload the jails to the point where so many people were willing to go to jail and willing to break the law that the state had no choice but to cooperate with him. And he wasn't even a leader of a country. He wasn't a president. He wasn't a minister. He didn't seek any position of power. But they seek to reason with him because he was the figurehead of the movement, right? So, and of course, he doesn't have to be the figurehead. There were many other people, but he was the one who really had the courageous ability to speak. So people looked up to him voluntarily as a leader. And so when people have a voluntary leadership, it's because the leader is so good at what they're doing. They don't need to coerce other people to get done what they want to get done. So if you have a great idea, like put gardens in schools or put, gardens in parks, food forest in parks, I would love to do that, by the way. And I'm working with whoever to make that happen. You know, you don't need violence if it's such a good idea. You should be able to convince people, morally educating, show them by example. Because if not, then what you're doing is you're saying it's okay not to be an educator. It's okay not to be a holistic or be like a natural practitioner and listen to people's bodies. It's okay to just give them a pill because, that's the fastest solution, the easiest solution. No, it's not. It does take time. It does take resistance. That's any process of change. When you interfere with the natural process and changes of life, you're going to end up with more problems than solutions. It's counterintuitive solutions. So meaning you think, oh, it's going to work. Maybe it'll work now, but it's not going to work later, right? And that's, same thing with World War II. If we put these people in camps, we'll have all this. It's called utilitarianism in philosophy. The ends justifies the means. Well, that creates mass murder. That creates people justifying all sorts of evil because of some potential possible good, and then imposing that on everybody, whether they like it or not. I mean, goodness. Are we to be gods over creation? No. I equate government exactly to that of man trying to be God, because that's exactly what the action is doing. If you follow God or follow nature, follow truth, you don't need those politicians. So when you say what we can use politicians for good or for God, well, now you're saying that man can be God, and so we have to be very careful with that. And I know that maybe it doesn't sound like that is the case, but it is. And you can look at the Stanley Milgram psychology experiment. You can look at the Stanford prison experiments. You can look at there's other ones, and I have a whole documentary about it and talking about human nature. It's about an hour long, and that right there is powerful. But you can go down the list, like I mentioned, Carl Jung. There's many others, and when you understand that, it's like, yeah, there is no political solution. There can never be. If anything, it's temporary. It's based on violence. It's never going to work. Right. It's like I've seen people put gardens in schools and stuff, like politicians, and they'll do stuff like that. But if it's truly going to last, it needs to be an effort that people want to happen. It's not going to be something that politicians want to happen. People want to happen. And so we got to think of things in terms of people, not politicians and who we put in office. So I'm willing to work with anybody who is in office. Like I talk to them. I do outreach, kind of like you do, right? Like just whatever we can do to create change. But I want to make sure it's done non-violently, and I want to make sure it's done not by passing any new laws. I want to make sure it's done where they're just people with influence. But I don't want people to look up to them as like, oh, well, it's the mayor who did it. It's like, no. Because if the mayor wants to credit for it being done, then that takes it away from, what we want to keep happening, which is everybody doing it everywhere, making it a normal thing. It's like, oh, it's only special, so it can only happen when a mayor does it. No, we want people to grow food everywhere. So let's open up the barriers of society so that way people can grow food from anywhere. All the HOAs, I can't do it. It's like, well, open up that barrier. Now everybody feels like, oh, now I can grow food. People have these barriers that are mostly in their own brain, their own mind, keeping them from doing what they know they should do. It's just that simple. It's not the politician, not some external thing. It's all internal in our own minds.
No, I hear you. I mean, I go through the the interplay between delineating, really thinking things through. So like for example, there's this many people in a community. They need this much food. So then that much food is produced by this many plants, and actually thinking it through compared to sometimes just, thinking it through as we do, and then from there, but it all being, a balance, because sometimes it's not rocket science. Like when we look at schools, like the cafeteria has a certain budget, they order this much food. It's like, well, how do we, if anything, just incrementally have it be more healthy food, and then some of the stuff gets into, like I'm saying, policy policy
But
change.
think about people like Elon, right? Or people, businessmen. They make changes all the time. They're providing a product for people. It's voluntary, without using any violence, without any law, any special authority or rights. They're creating change every single day. So what's wrong with that? Being someone who has a product or a service to provide for people and creating change using your voluntary means. To me, that is much more powerful than a politician who has to be seen as special authority to use violence to actually create change. I think voluntary strategies are way better, which is the whole reason why voluntarism exists.
Yeah, no, I know. There's times though all we can do is start with children because the more we understand the brain and we understand psychology, a lot of people get hardwired in their personality by the time they're 35 unless they really understand neuroplasticity, unless they really, understand what it means to be a perpetual learner, unless they're really proficient in cognitive biases and like they actually like embrace effective communication with others, because as listening is so important to really be able to listen and understand and have your undivided attention on building rapport with somebody, and like I'm saying, how trust, where then we have a culture of trust compared to a culture of fear. Because really, I mean, you mentioned human nature. Sometimes that'd be a pet peeve to me because I come from a perspective that I resonate with human nature being divine, and there can be human conditioning, which conditions people like into a scarcity mindset, which then becomes what we can, people will call their nature, but I would say sometimes it's more of a conditioning, and it's really interesting, because that tends to be when I've had philosophical conversations with associates and friends of mine who work in government, and a lot of times how they come back to like how people are stupid, they're dumb, they're not to be trusted. You need government in there to make sure
They
they're.
justify the systems are all about justifying their own existence.
But
It's just slave, yeah.
I'm saying that's somewhat based off that false premise.
Hmm.
Our nature isn't divine, that like we are divine, but as a coping mechanism to trauma and to scarcity, and to threats, then it can bring out, a different type of person that's like, stress is supposed to be something that is short term, not something people
Yes.
in their whole life, you know?
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So you get it. And
Yeah, people are living in a fight and flight mode most of their times nowadays, and that tenses up their muscles and makes them feel constricted. They're not expressing, so the freedom is not on the emotional or physical level. Would you expect it to be in the mental or spiritual level? No, because these two are a reflection of each other. So, yes, you hit it on the nail right there. There needs to be a shift in culture. There needs to be a shift in the social aspect of our society, and not just one aspect. So everything, like I said, the politicians are on the backbone of philosophers. Remember I said that? So it's like in the social culture that has a lot to do with philosophy, right? So when I get involved with universities and colleges, I'm recognizing that is right there potentially the solution to everything. And being that I'm of their age and I have certain knowledge they don't, I feel like I have a moral obligation to share with them. And you just said it, the younger generation, that's kind of where you want to focus to change things. Yeah, because they're the ones programmed into statism, that belief system, into authority at a very young age in the schooling system. So it's either the parents take their kid out or the kid grows up and recognizes, oh, shoot, I was brainwashed my whole life, right? It's either or. So if I interject in their 20s, it makes it much easier for them. And not only that, their 20s is where they have all the energy, all the passion, the ability. They understand how to use the tools that are in the current day to change things. If you have 50 people on TikTok filming at the same time, you can't really censor that compared to one person with a YouTube channel. You see what I mean? And not only that, but their editing skills, their ability to deliver it, their ability to use comedy, to use all sorts of things that I am certainly not as good at. So if I can simply go there and inspire and share different ideas and get some momentum and energy going, I guarantee you, you're going to see a shift in so much happening naturally without me having to even say, oh, look at what I talk about. And oh, you gotta check out my book. It will happen naturally as I build connections and rapport with others and build the energy and as they get curious and they say, well, what do you do? Why are you interested in that? What are your political positions? They're going to ask all sorts of questions, right? And as we ask more questions to each other, we're going to build that stronger bond. I'm not going to say, you need to wake up your brainwash. That's not going to wake up anybody. Look at Larkin Rose. He has Candles in the Dark seminar, the most effective strategies to talk to other people who are basically in the dark, as we call them. The most effective strategy is Socratic dialogue, asking questions, getting people curious about their own beliefs so they can come up to their own conclusions. Well, isn't that what freedom is? It would be counterintuitive for those who care about freedom to project their problems on those that they want to free. See, so we actually have been the reason why the truth movement has been unsuccessful is because we're using counterintuitive solutions and solutions that are actually making the problems often worse. I mean, there's even a card in the Illuminati card game, if you know about that, and there's one on conspiracy theorists, and it says the conspiracy theorist is very helpful to the powerful elite because they give them useful ideas.
Well, that's funny.
And if you think about that, yeah, because we're always thinking, what's the next way we're going to be controlled? All the elite has to do is look at these crazy people and say, hey, that's a good idea. Let's do that. You know, we're feeding the problem, but we're not actually solving it. We're looking at all the aspects of the prison cell that we're in, the shininess of the bars and the intricacies of the angles in the room. We're studying every detail of the prison that we're in, but we're not thinking about how do we actually escape it. You look at the comments online, and people are always like, well, what are the solutions? We know the problem, but what's the solution? Can we organize? Yes, any big content creator in the truth movement can probably organize a rally within seconds. Why don't they do it? They can organize events way bigger than the ones that we're doing. Why don't they do it? You see what I mean? They're trapped either in a material greed mentality of I'm doing this for money and I'm doing it because I've done it for so long. I have to talk about the news. I have to talk about the problems. They need outsiders. They need people with new ideas to help change things. And so that's my goal. That's my responsibility. As an outsider, I need to go to the college systems. I need to go to these independent communities and media places and share different ideas and strategies. And whether they like it or not, I have to be the one to show it in action myself, show by example. And it may be a slow build up, but nonetheless, it is necessary.
Yeah. Well, hearing this, I mean, I'm obviously privy. I mean, anyone in your group is privy to what you're working on focusing, whether we say it's manifesting land, whether it's buying land or what. But I can't help but think about like how many people would you say, like, do you know? Because on one hand, it's people, because, we're doing this Zoom, and obviously it would be ideal to do an in-person interview, but we've connected in person. And because what I'm envisioning is I've been in touch with people who have done high level think tanks, people like Foster Gamble, and the idea of like you don't always need a lot of people, like 12 people that are really, focused on brainstorming solutions. Because
Sure.
like hearing this, I mean, I wanted to share with you like back in like 2010, I was part of a group called MedMob. I don't know if you ever heard of them.
No.
We were going around to like jails and other places and meditating, and the idea some of the larger groups would go to state legislatures and meditate. And the idea is it's the Maharishi effect where a group of people meditating can lower crime in their area and promote more peace. So it's like my part of my vision, and a lot of people call me idealistic, is world peace through diplomacy. But I understand that we are peace, and like it's an energy, and that we can measure it in what's called coherence, which is like structured symmetrical energy. And so if you have a group of people meditating that are peace, eventually it's like, how many of us do we have to do if we're distributed to just like eliminate crime and eliminate violence? Because sometimes I think about like, what I want to do with raising a family and kids and homeschooling and networking with others and the best practices for homeschooling and trying to live somewhat in a balance of you're an intentional community, you have your privacy, and like I've mentioned, how we transition from like where we live this reality one day at a time. So it's like we have these beautiful visions, and it's like, well, what do we have to do? And sometimes it's like with a think tank, we're all envisioning that it's happened. But then what we do is we kind of backtrack and somewhat reverse engineer in reverse of like, this is what would have happened to get to this. You get what I'm saying?
Yes.
It makes it more empowered each day when we look at our calendar and our time, and we time block and what we're wanting to do, and to just plug along. Because like I call it strategic synchronicity, where sometimes how it works, it's like we just have to get super clear on what we want, and we just get the ball rolling, because no matter how smart any of us are, nothing ever happens as we plan it, because the synchronicity is, it's
Yeah.
unexpected, but it somewhat could be strategic when we realize this higher power, this unity, wants this to happen as well too. So sorry, I mean, I'm trying not to be all over the place.
No, no, those are good observations, and I know some people may call it idealistic, but nonetheless, you can observe, like for instance, people putting gardens in jails and the recidivism rate going down 60, 70% in certain studies, people doing meditation to solve all sorts of different problems. There's tons of scientific literature on that, but yeah, it's considered a spiritual practice. So, I have an open mind to a lot of this stuff because, frankly, I would love to incorporate it into our events, and I would love your help in doing that, right? It's like, how do we, create more of a connection between the people so that way we can be more on the same page and create more change. At the moment, I think I need more people who are around my age. I really do, for the energy, the momentum. Most of my audience in real life is 50 and older. It's just the reality of it. They know it themselves. They tell me. They say, I would love to see more young people. Now, of course, the question in my head says, well, where are your kids? Where are your families, right? But I notice some of them, they're struggling to talk with their own family. So they have things that they have to go on with themselves, right? Because they live such long lives. They're just waking up to problems in the past couple of years. It's like I'm kind of like a trauma support for conspiracy theorists. I mean, in generally speaking, in real life, which is fine, right? But that's why I need to reach a generation that hasn't experienced too much, but is open and energetic and curious where my future is going to head, and they don't know. And even if they don't know and they feel like there's so much uncertainty, it gives them a lot of fear and anxiety. It would help a lot to have just a support structure, support community that they can just talk to about anything, right? And be willing to open up to and say, yeah, the problems are that our world is crazy, but we can be the ones to fix it because we're together on this and we are in the same environment and perhaps we can create some local change. So I really want to get that conversation going. And I would welcome you, Alex, to join me, on that. I don't know how old you are, but it's cool to always have people who are excited, who have ideas, who are energetic, to get involved in either case. And of course, like I said, I'm going to approach with complete love and compassion, not really any agenda. I believe that the ideas will happen spontaneously, such as, truth and freedom, because people want that. People see it. It's basically unavoidable at a certain point of tyranny, where people have no choice but to confront it, especially in their own personal lives with disease. Like I feel like I'm not free because a disease is holding me back. I feel like I'm not free because a trauma is holding me back. People feel it on different levels. And it's just inevitable for it to appear when you start just bonding with somebody overall.
Yeah. Well, I mean, from what I'm hearing you say, I mean, for one, I was born in 1990. I'm 34. I have a brother who's 23. And because like an idea is, the idea of like, because think about it, when you put on an event called Florida Freedom, you kind of like narrow in on a specific genre of people.
Right.
You have to look at like, if you have a subset of 1,000 people your age,
Hmm.
we're talking about like 1% would be maybe interested in that. And so
Yep.
some, because I've had the similar thing. I've recently found a spiritual home with Unity Church.
Hmm.
Guess what? The youngest person there is 60 years old. And, it's interesting. And it's like I'm kind of going through something similar. I can relate to you because it's like, well, how do I invite people my age? But what
Right.
I think it's like somehow just it's kind of like if you put on something just of like, hey, 20 to 25-year-olds that want to network, and it's not about freedom, it's not about anything other than just trying to meet people. It's kind of like what I do in real estate, where every day I look at how many conversations did I have because a conversation leads to an appointment, leads to a signed agreement, leads to a closing or an offer accepted. And so it's like when people train themselves because I will say, I mean, a big part of my purpose has been financial freedom. And I think a lot of people our age, that's where their focus is because every day, we have bills, we have to spend money, so it's like
Yep.
going out, money needs to come in. Financial freedom is when you have enough that you don't have to really worry about it, and that can be accomplished through minimalism to a certain extent, where people learn to be like, oh, instead of always going on expensive vacations, I live right next to the beach or other things or whatever. You get what I'm saying? So it's kind of a balance because we do have to be humble that a lot of this is somewhat of a luxury. I mean, I can't help but being, having empathy for people and listening to them and to understand where their minds at and their thoughts, like what is concerning them, what are they doing? And, the idea of like when people are just trying to survive, they're not really thinking about changing the world and then actually figuring out like the nuts and
Right.
bolts.
Well,
And then
that's why it's easier when you have other people and you bolster that inspiration. Because somebody will want to change the world naturally. Let's say if they're a Christian and they say, we got to bring God's kingdom on earth, you know what I mean? Just look at how people are become so fanatical in their causes, whether it's political or religious. You have to ask why that is. What would cause them to leave their day-to-day life to pursue something like that? It's because they're seeking internally some higher purpose or meaning within their life. They know that this life is not merely about the material things or the greed, right? And being that you've lived with like in Hawaii and visit different cultures, you've probably have that different sense that, I maybe haven't experienced a lot of, but I've observed it in a lot of people. So, I think that's very interesting, right? Is when you can see those cultures and how we kind of displace from that, because that can give us some insight to how we deliver the message now. Um, and how we kind of bring people together. So, I would encourage, your ideas and your strategies alongside this. And I've gathered a group of people already outside the college system that's around my age to help me, and so I look forward to seeing what we can do. And if we can't do it one place, we do it another place. I mean, whatever. I'm just building connections. That's it. I don't have any crazy plans. That's it. And besides, somebody from an administrative office will watch this video, at some point. Think I'm some radical who's trying to like, create a rebellion on campus. I'm not trying to do that. You know what I mean? I don't, that's the last thing I would want to do. It's more so a spiritual awakening that would create real change and actually make the campus better. That would actually want the students to learn, want them, inspire them, and get them better grades because now they're inspired and they want to actually change things in the world. See, most people, at least from my experience, what I've learned is that they don't know what they're going to do with their future. They don't know their financial status, as you say. And that includes me. I don't know where the future is going to head. And many people tell me there's going to be a collapse. People say, don't buy land, right? I get mixed things. That mixture, that confusion gets cleared up the more people you have that are inspired, who want to do stuff. And I'm going to get that inspiration from people who are coming up in life, not people who are already feel like they've lived their life already. And like I said, most of the people coming to my events are 50 and older. They tell me, they say that they just want to go off grid. They want to leave society because everybody's going to go crazy, or that they felt like they already lived life. So there's nothing more really for them to do. They feel like life is over. They're not looking to change things. You see what I mean? So there is a target audience, and that target audience has to be people like me. And I believe there's a lot of people like me. I just haven't met them because just the few people that I've met in my generation are curious and open and They want to learn things. They maybe follow Joe Rogan. They maybe follow some of these online content creators, and they aren't producing themselves. They aren't doing it themselves, but they follow their work, right? So I can help equip them simply with the tools of like, this is how you can do it yourself, and let's do it together. And then they'll be like, that's awesome. Because the first things is always like, oh, I'm afraid to speak in front of a camera. I'm afraid to do events. I'm afraid to do, it's always some fear somewhere, right? So those fears are always easily dispelled when you have other people with you. You say, no, let's do it. Who cares what everybody thinks? Let's do it. You know what I mean? That's my mentality. It's like, let's just do it. It's got to be done. It's got to be done. It's just that simple.
Yeah, it's funny. Have you heard of the acronym Ford? So it's something I use for my effective communication. So Ford is family. So this is, when you're meeting someone new or you're wanting to progress in your relationship with somebody, talking to them about their family, talking to them about their occupation, talking to them about their recreation. What are they doing recreation, and then their dreams and their desires. And so it's really that simple. So it's like when people in a community just ask others questions, usually around Ford, it's a good seg point. And then I bring up TED, which is like, tell me more, explain. uh the last part, TED, basically it gets into that, you know what I mean, how it's the whole idea of just active listening with the purpose of rapport and facilitating trust and all of that, so usually I try to do these podcasts around an hour.
Yep,
When I got up to like just under 2 hours, but we can go, another 10, 20 minutes, but I kind of want to give you the floor if there's a particular uh discussion you want to have now, or how you want to wrap this up, or how, any.
sure. Yeah, well, I'm curious what you envision the future as. I'm curious generally. My vision. I've written it down. I don't know if you've seen like my plan, right? I have that written down. Um, and I want to do a kind of community center, right, for education. So, what is your vision regarding that? Where do you see your role within that? And how do you think it's going to manifest? Is it a good idea for me to get involved with colleges and universities? What are your general thoughts about everything?
Well, for one, I was doing something similar. I was at SPC doing engineering technology, and I was involved in student government there. I was a treasurer, and I had meetings with the long-term planner of the city because I was trying to get a garden, at the Clearwater campus, and have it be part of the sustainability curriculum. You know what I mean? And to have it obviously be permaculture, because as I was learning permaculture, I got into engineering because it's like I wanted to understand how to reverse engineer nature. And then I saw like, wow, here's all this land, and the city the college is in is Clearwater. So then how do I get a partnership between the city and there? But I kept hitting roadblocks, where they were like, "Oh, your ideas are great," and so on, but follow up was us, later on. And that's why I just went to Kauai, because I'm like, I'm gonna go to an area where like I don't have to explain this to people, you know? Because but the other thing is, at the same time, it was November 11th, 2011, that Thrive came out. And I felt like that was powerful for people because obviously it's a long documentary. I mean, it's not over 3 hours. And the way it emphasizes the solution, but you don't really get into the solutions until you have diagnosed the problem, because a lot of times more than 50% of the solution is accurately diagnosing the problem, And so I was trying to start a booth at the SPC Clearwater for like Thrive, to
Sure.
do DVDs. And like, I'm pretty sure I did. And I was trying to work with Kimberly and Foster, to integrate it into their website so there could be a map, and then other uh, activists like myself could be inspired by what I was doing, and then they could sign up, and Thrive would send them like a kit where like here's a cover for a
Cool.
table, and then here's DVDs and so on. But it's just, it's it's interesting working with other people. I mean, you may have remembered what I told you about my experiences, in community, and like the idea
Hmm.
of everybody needs to really understand like what I'm sharing about the effective communication, conflict resolution, nonviolent communication, processing their life trauma and baggage before they enter community, so they're not like uh,
Yeah.
making a mess with it
And
everywhere.
and thank you, by the way, because to have other people who see that. I want you to help me in this. I know that you are with finding land and so forth, but yeah, I thank you. I want you to stick around for all that because I think we align very well on that. And I admit I'm not an expert on those things. I may not know exactly about how to do it, right?
Yeah, and neither am I, man. We learn by doing, and then I try to research things because the internet. There's intentional communities. There's people that are
Right.
trying. We call them little satellites, but I'm not sure if I've answered your question. You're kind of like how do I fit into your vision, and then
Sure. Yeah.
in the future. So yeah, I mean already what I'm kind of sharing, just
Hmm.
participating, getting to know you. Because like I'm saying, man, I just can't, meet you at your event and go a few times, and all of a sudden we have all this trust and rapport, like I'm explaining.
Right.
It's time, it's that cliche of, people, when people get really good at this, they know how to manipulate people, but I don't do that because I like like the more suasion, what you're saying, like
Hmm.
I believe moral courage is like so important, and that yes, we can, have a relationship with God, but then it's also about checking ourselves about things, But I'm just saying it'd be like interesting to think like, oh, people just meet. And that's why even for you, like some of these people that have, offered you resources, it's like, if I were you, I'd figure out how do you build rapport more with these people, so there's
Yes.
trust, there's more of that, you
Yeah.
know,
So what I would do, and then I want to do it with you too, because I haven't, is like go out to dinner, just do fun things. Because like Plato said, you learn more about a person in an hour of play than years of conversation. And I truly believe that is super important. If I use certain quotes to begin some of my works. That one is might be a future one, but it's definitely key. Look up something called soma therapy. There's a documentary called Soma, and it's known as an anarchist therapy. It's a therapy of using exercise that actually makes people into anarchists. And they did this in Brazil to help slaves and people who were facing oppression overcome it and repair and build rapport between each other. I mean, it's amazing. But that kind of that idea of play, of using play as a means to connect with someone else is super key. Which is, remember I told you, like on the land project, I want to do a lot of fun things, a lot of fun events. Like I want to just like do a bunch of games. Like to me, that's huge. And besides, that's kind of what life is for, in my opinion. So, I come from that background. My family used to throw parties all the time. We used to do a lot of fun things. So for me to do these truth events, they're great, they're informative, but I think we got to get to the point of fun and energy. And that's another reason, again, why I want to reach my generation. Because I think they want to have fun. They don't want to talk about all the crazy stuff in the world. That's part of the reason why they ignore it. So, but we do have to face the reality of things at the same time. So let's do both, right? There is a way to do both and without creating division, without creating more problems. And that's where voluntarism comes in. It's so unifying, helps bring people together. And I'll be sharing that, as a very key strategy. And I don't think anybody will be against it. It's peaceful. There's no violence involved. I'm not telling people what to think or how to live their own lives. That's the whole premises of voluntarism. So it's ironic if somebody says, well, I don't want to be a voluntarist. Well, good. That's voluntarism in action. See what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah, I'm trying to pull up. I asked producer Rob, but I'm trying to find it. There was a great meme that talked about in a state of play how easy it is for people to form new neural connections in their brain. So, like, if you're trying to learn a new habit, because think about it, man, with the learning curve, a lot of people are their own worst enemy. So like when they're learning something new, they not they unless they understand this, they're not always in a state of play where they'll say like, "Oh, I'm not an expert in philosophy," or "I'm not a permaculturist," or whatever. They prevent their own learning because if they're in a state of play, it's a lot easier to like make these neural, connections. And it's
Yep.
just, I was trying to pull it up. I've seen it before and I've shared it with a lot of people because, sometimes that's what this is all about. Because I mean, if the vision I've had for a long time is a skill-based economy where basically everybody understands like what they're an expert in and what they love to teach others. And then they decide what they want to learn. So like if I want to learn how to play guitar, I let that be known to our community. And then if somebody wants to learn how to, grow fruit trees, they let that be known, or they want to understand.
Yeah.
You
I
get what
think we can do
like
that.
form an economy where we're sharing skills with each other. Because I remember when I realized this a while ago, I was like, oh my God, there can be these billionaires, Bill Gates walking around, but if he's not with his bodyguard and someone tries to harm him, like what is the value of him knowing martial arts and having that skill where he walks around with a competence, and like the idea of what is the purpose of money if not to increase our skills, you know what I mean? And to really think
Yes.
creatively compared to the way a lot of us have been indoctrinated to think about how we acquire skills, you know?
Yeah, it's a huge point. And when we get land, I would love to incorporate that because I want to incorporate a lot of elements like that. And what I mean is like very practically. For instance, having databases on different things and participatory boards and signs and stuff like that that would get people involved, like a book drop and then like a computer that people can use on site to do research where we have AI chat LLM models built in so people can do research and all sorts of things like a library. Like there's so much potential in getting land and doing stuff and making money off of that so you can do and build that up more and more, right? So that's part of the reason, securing the future and bringing people together to one site. That would be awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah.
We'll find the meme and I'll share it with you because it's powerful. That's one of my favorite quotes too, but it's nice to see the neuroscience associated with that quote.
Yeah. Well, hey, man, dude, I would love to hang out with you in person sometime. I think we should do it more, not just, at our events. And I thank you for having me on. I do want to probably head off soon if that's okay.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Corey. So yeah, I mean, I didn't pull up. I'm sure you know offhand where people can find you. It's that tap link,
Sure.
right? Your links.
Well, I'll lead people to the liberator.us is best.
Yeah, cool. And I'm gonna have to check out. I saw briefly. I think you shared in the group the Jim Gale video that you were over there working on, right? So
Yeah, well, there's a lot of videos we filmed. We filmed like over 24 hours worth of footage. I had a friend vlog the whole thing. So, and he has his own channel. So, that was spontaneous. That all happened because like last second he's like, "I'll go," and I'm like, "Okay." I know I offered you if you wanted to go too. There's always more opportunities in the future. So
oh,
we'll always do more stuff. Don't
on
worry, man.
on behalf of producer Rob, myself, our whole Truth Lab, audience and beyond, thank you so much for your time today. And yeah, let's definitely link up. And
Thank you.
I appreciate so much, man, everything you're doing.
No, you too, man. And really, I love your ideas and the way you're thinking about things. And your help is so essential. I had real estate people who help, but you're like aligned on the vision, which to me is just gigantic. You really understand not just buying land, but also like what we can do with that land. And that's to me like a dual purpose, a dual ability to do things. So thank you.
You're welcome, man. We're making it happen one day at a time, right? And right,
We'll do it. We got it. We will do it, my friend. It's just a matter of time.
right. Talk to you later.
Peace
Peace.
out.